Okay, it looks like we are live, and I think CCTV is probably also live as well. It looks like we are live, and I think CCTV is probably also live as well.
Don't make me laugh. There are no secrets here.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we should get started. I'm Marielle Blais. I'm the vice chair of the Vermont Progressive Party, and I would like to introduce our moderator, Tanya Wiechoski, who is a member of our coordinating committee. She is also the Vermont Progressive Party chair in Essex Town, and she is also running for the House from Essex Town, Chittenden 8 seat. And when she's not active in the party, which is most of the time, she works as a social worker and splits her time between the public schools and her private practice. Thank you, Tanya.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marielle. And thank you, everyone, for being here. This is the Vermont Progressive Party Lieutenant Governor's Forum. And I really, as a candidate myself, want to take a moment to thank our candidates for participating. I know how time-consuming preparing for these can be and how difficult they can be sometimes. So we are here today to hear from all of the candidates who have requested a progressive endorsement for the office of Lieutenant Governor. Again, thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. Only state committee members are in our live meeting tonight. If you're not a state committee member, people are welcome to watch via live streaming on YouTube. The forum will be structured with a long question and answer section where each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer the question. And after all candidates have answered, if there's a follow-up needed, each candidate will be given an additional 30 seconds to clarify or follow up as requested by the moderator. We ask that the candidates respect the strict time limit as we have a really limited time today to hear from all of you on so many important issues. We'll have Marielle keeping time today, and she'll display cards to let you know when you have 30 seconds, 10 seconds, and then when you need to end. After the long questions, we will move into a short lightning round where candidates will be asked a series of questions that are meant to be answered with 1 to 3 words only without explanation. And then we'll move into our candidate closing statements, where each candidate will have 1 minute to share their final thoughts and reflections on how they would take our state forward with progressive policy agenda. We will rotate through who goes first for each question. Everyone will be muted to limit background noise so that we can hear our candidates' answers. And that does include the candidates, who will be unmuted by the host when it's their turn to speak. So please bear with us if there are any delays. I'd like to briefly introduce each of our candidates as we don't have time for opening statements tonight. These statements were given to us in advance by the candidates. With us tonight, we have Molly Gray, who currently serves as an assistant attorney general in Montpelier and as an adjunct professor of human rights law at the Vermont Law School. We have Debbie Ingram, who is a state senator and the executive director of a grassroots organizing group called Vermont Interfaith Action, made up of compassionate and justice-minded people statewide who work together to effect systemic change around issues of social justice. We have Brenda Siegel. Brenda is a single mother, teacher, movement builder, and small business owner. She is a longtime policy advocate in the State House who has spent her career fighting for social, economic, and racial justice. And finally, we have Tim Ash, formerly on staff with Bernie Sanders, the president of the Senate, in which He was the first senator to serve with the Progressive nomination, and where he has led passage of one of the nation's most progressive policy agendas, including protecting women's reproductive rights, gun safety, clean water, increased minimum wage, consumer and workplace protections, and criminal justice and law enforcement reform. Thank you again, candidates, for being here. We will begin with our longer questions. Each of these questions are grounded in one of our platform pillars of economic, social, or environmental justice. As a reminder, you will have 90 seconds to answer each question, and if follow-up is needed, each candidate will be given an additional 30 seconds. Our first question today is about the Progressive Policy Platform, which you were all asked to familiarize yourself with ahead of time. During the past 20 years, members of the Vermont Progressive Party, the largest and most successful third party in the country, have led the way on significant legislation, including marriage equality, livable minimum wages, and workers' rights. What part of the Progressive Platform most stands out to you? And if you are elected Lieutenant Governor, what specifically would you do to advance progressive causes in Vermont? We'll start this question with Debbie Ingram.
Thank you very much, Tanya, and thank you everybody for inviting us to be here tonight. I think the element that most stands out to me in the party platform is around racial justice. I would put my record around racial justice up against any legislator or public figure in Vermont. I didn't just start looking at racial justice when George Floyd was tragically murdered. I've been working on this for many years through Vermont Interfaith Action, and in the Senate, I was a champion of the legislation that set up the racial equity panel and executive director. I championed the ethnic studies bill to look at racial equity in education. I introduced the Indigenous Peoples Day, making that permanent. I introduced the amendment to the Constitution to clarify the prohibition against slavery. So I believe that I have a very, very strong record on racial justice. It has now become even more urgent, but what is good about what has come out of the terrible tragedies and the protests is that there is a lot of momentum now for making real change. And I believe that I could, in my role as Lieutenant Governor, be a person who could really lead a discussion in Vermont, help white people to see how people of color experience our state differently, and work with the people themselves, nothing about us without us, to make sure that we make the changes that are necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Next, I'd like to hear from Molly Gray.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Senator Polina. I see you there as well. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I've spent my career fighting for human rights. I teach human rights law at Vermont Law School. I've worked for the International Committee of the Red Cross, fighting for the human rights of Guantanamo detainees before Congress, leading missions into conflict zones around the world to fight for the basic human needs of individuals. And what strikes me most about the Progressive Policy Platform, and one that I also share, is that it is the responsibility of government to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights for all Vermonters. And that is what brings me to this race as a candidate. And my platform in running for Lieutenant Governor is focused on human rights, the right to education, the right to internet for all Vermonters, the right to childcare, the right to paid family and medical leave, and the list goes on. And I wouldn't be running if we have not been stalled in this state on protecting, fulfilling, and promoting the basic human rights of all Vermonters. So that's why I'm here. I'm thrilled to be here tonight and look forward to talking further about the Progressive Party platform and how to be an advocate, supporter, and ally moving forward.
Wonderful, thank you. Next, I'd like to hear from Brenda Siegel.
She's mute.
Josh, can you unmute Brenda?
Thank you. Thank- Thanks everyone for having me, and it's wonderful to be back with you all. For me, it really is all about intersectionality of all of the issues that are on the Progressive Party platform. I don't think that we solve any one of these issues if we don't address all of them together. I believe in building an overarching framework like the Green Mountain New Deal or Renew New England, which Rights and Democracy has recently introduced, that would bring together climate justice with racial justice and economic justice. And throughout my career, I have fought for paid family and medical leave, livable wage, and having a Medicare for All program. What I know as a low-income Vermonter and as a single mom is that unless we address the issues that most impact Vermonters all across this state, then we aren't going to have the changes that we want and need to have. And in order to do that, we have to work with people on the ground in communities that are so often forgotten and marginalized, and bring them to the State House in order to make that type of change inside of our legislature.
Thank you, Brenda. Finally, Tim Ash.
Well, thanks everybody. As many of you know, I served as a progressive city councilor in Burlington and was the first person nominated as a progressive to serve in the state Senate, which I should tell you, some candidate supporters do a good job of trying to alert others that that's somehow a downside. But I'm here once again actively seeking the support of the Progressive Party, in part because the centerpiece of economic justice and human rights have been things that I have not just talked the talk, but actually accomplished things for in my entire adult life here in Vermont. Many of you know me from when I first graduated from UVM and started working for Bernie. I was a union organizer, organizing nurses and adjunct faculty members. I then developed about 400 units of affordable housing for older Vermonters at Cathedral Square. I've been an adjunct in the state college system. And then in the Senate, the last 4 years, I've been the president of the Senate. And I believe we've made great progress passing some of the most progressive legislation in America, protecting a woman's right to choose, which is an economic as well as a human rights issue, increasing the minimum wage for the first meaningful time in decades, paid family leave, which was vetoed by the governor. We marshaled a veto-proof majority in the Senate. The House fell 1 vote short. And on, we have advanced major progressive pieces of legislation working with Senators Polina, Perchlik, Baruth, Pearson. It has really been a great run.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, everyone, for your thoughtful answers. Our next question. Because of the most recent federal tax cuts, the wealthiest Vermonters, the top 5%, are benefiting from a $237 million tax cut intended to stimulate the economy. Do you agree with this policy? Why or why not? Would you support directing some of those tax savings to Vermont through a state income surcharge, and where would you prioritize that spending? We're going to begin this question with Molly Gray.
I do not support the Trump tax cuts. I think in this moment, more than ever, we need to address income inequality across Vermont and across our nation. We have communities who are struggling. 70,000 homes in our state do not have access to basic human services through the internet, and it is 2020. We don't have access to education. We don't have access to paid family and medical leave, to childcare, and the list goes on. This is a moment where we need to address our greatest needs. We need to align our budget with those needs, and then to take action to reform our tax system to address inequality and wealth here in Vermont, and to make sure that we're doing that in a way that helps us recover, that helps us become stronger as a state, and puts our communities, our families, and equity at the forefront.
Thank you. The next person for this question will be Brenda.
She needs, Josh, can you unmute her?
I'm having an internet issue. Can you go to someone and then I can fix it and come back?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Tim, how about you?
Sure. Well, the Trump tax cuts are obviously an immoral act of Congress and the president, and it's just the latest of the Republican-led cabal in Washington who have run up massive deficits in order to give massive tax breaks, all while increasing money on military spending. So this is not the first, it's the most recent experience we've had. I will answer the question directly. My first instinct is never to raise taxes. It's to meet the needs of the state with existing resources and then look to additional revenues if we can't accomplish it with existing resources. So I would be open to looking at revenues, although it is not my first instinct. I should say that when I was the chair of the Senate Finance Committee for 4 years, I had the difficult position of facing questions like this. And in times that were not quite as bad as they are now, but still not great times, we did raise revenues on wealthier Vermonters by a grand total of nearly $50 million, and also raised money on out-of-state financial firms who make a lot of money off Vermonters to the tune of another $30 or so million. So in recent years, we have done a good job of making an already progressive tax code even more progressive. And I should say, I have led the opposition to property tax reforms, which would have smacked the middle class hard to make sure that they were still protected by income sensitivity.
Thank you. Brenda, are you ready or should we come back to you?
She's muted.
Okay. I'm very sorry. I live in a terrible internet area. I live in a rural community. So this does happen. Thank you for all for understanding. So I just want to say that the wealthy in this state need to pay their fair share. While the wealthiest have gotten richer and richer in our state, everyone else has lost wealth. And this is not a time to say that we cannot tax the people who have the most here in this state, while there are other people freezing in tents. And cannot survive, people who can't feed their children, people waiting in lines for food right now. This is not the moment to say that we cannot have a progressive taxing solution here. And we can look at revenues. We can move our property tax to an income tax, a progressive income tax structure for how we pay for education. We can raise our minimum wage, which would bring in revenue for all of those people who currently get a check back at the end of the year. We can create a wealth tax, a progressive tax across the system, across the board, and we can create opportunity by making a green economy, which will ultimately bring in more revenue to our state. Yes, some of this is a strategic investment. Yes, this means putting money into the harm that has been caused to people all across the state for so many years. However, if we don't do that, then families like my own continue to struggle with no way out. And it is time for us to do something different.
Thank you, Brenda. Debbie Ingram.
Thank you. Well, I don't support the federal tax cuts either. And before COVID struck, I actually was a co-signer of Senator Polina's Green New Deal bill, which would have taken a surcharge on folks at the very highest income levels to pay for things like weatherization and other climate change solutions. But since COVID has struck, I would take that wiggle room that we have with the wealthiest Vermonters who benefited from a federal tax cut, and definitely place a surcharge on them in order to avoid any kind of policy of austerity coming out of COVID. I think that is the absolute opposite of what we should be thinking about in terms of policy. It will prolong our recovery from COVID if we cut programs for people who are already down and out in a bad situation. And so I think absolutely we have to look at a variety of different things, definitely putting pressure on the federal government to pass more stimulus and relief packages, but absolutely looking at some kind of surcharge or raising taxes on the wealthiest Vermonters.
Wonderful. Thank you, Debbie. I'm recognizing that that was a somewhat complicated two-part question, so I am going to do a follow-up here and give each candidate an additional 30 seconds to, if they feel like they need to add anything. And I just want to reiterate that the second part of the question asked if you would support a surcharge on the tax cuts that have been given and where you would prioritize that spending to lift up Vermont. And we'll come back to Molly first.
Yes, I would. And I think it's something I've been thinking a lot about just in terms of this moment that we're in and how we're thinking about our relief and response to COVID-19. We've seen a lot of initiatives to try to encourage the collection of funds to support relief and recovery efforts. I would ask for the surcharge to be immediately spent on broadband, on childcare, on paid family and medical leave, and the urgent needs of our communities and families right now.
Thank you. Tim, you're next.
He's muted. Josh?
There we go. I addressed this in my first answer. As I said, I would be open to it. But I'll tell you, one of the blessings and curse of being in a leadership role the last 4 years is when things are bad, you know how bad they are. And I think to Senator Ingram's point, to Debbie's point, I have been a leader dating back to the Great Recession when then Pro Tem Peter Shumlin worked with the governor on massive cuts to state government, and I helped lead the fight against that. And right now, with the revenue hole that we have, the first priority must be preventing major cuts to existing programs.
Wonderful, thank you. Brenda Siegel.
She's muted.
Thank you.
Um,
So yes, I would support a surcharge, and I think that money, especially right now during this time of COVID, needs to go towards education, childcare, and broadband, because I don't think we're out of the woods right now on the issues that are impacting us the most. So education right now, we have our teachers who have not been brought to the table on the issues surrounding reopening. And we need to be able to fully fund that work so that they can, in fact, do what they need to do for our children and themselves to be safe.
Wonderful, thank you. And Senator Ingram, did you have anything you wanted to add as well?
Well, not too much really. I do think I addressed it before. I would just make sure we don't make cuts on essential programs of things like, I'm thinking of things like food security and things that they're really important to Vermonters. We'd use that surcharge money to pay for those.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your answers. Our next question, we've touched on a little here. COVID-19 has laid bare severe shortcomings in our healthcare and economic systems. How would you use the COVID-19 crisis as an opportunity to build better healthcare and economic safety nets for the most vulnerable Vermonters? For this question, we will start with Brenda.
Like a little jungle gym I'm on with this muting situation. So Tanya, I'm sorry, can you say that again? I'm really having internet problems, so I'm like over here trying to make it work all the time.
Now I'm muted. Okay. COVID-19 has laid bare severe shortcomings in our healthcare and economic systems. How would you use the COVID-19 crisis as an opportunity to build better healthcare and economic safety nets for the most vulnerable Vermonters?
Okay, so I want to say that right now we have a major opportunity to build better out of this crisis. The work that I've done for the last 9 years has been with my community to build a long-term economic driver. And we're going to need to do that exact same kind of work, going into each and every community, working with town governments to come up with creative economic drivers. In addition, we have to build our economy from the bottom up. We have to make sure that we have livable wage and paid family and medical leave. We have to make sure that we're working towards universal health care and a green economy. Again, these are investments and we are facing a budget shortfall. But if we don't take this opportunity to make the changes that we want and need to make, then we are going to end up in the exact same place, because when we started, we were not on a stable enough foundation for our economy not to crumble. And we need to build a better and stronger economy where Vermonters not only can survive, but they also can thrive.
Thank you, Brenda Siegel. Next, Tim Ash.
Well, yeah, COVID-19, it obviously puts pressure on areas where we already had pressure. It is a global pandemic, which is something that overwhelms systems, but yet we can still learn from them and move forward. I think if there is a silver lining from the healthcare side, there's really, I guess I would say there's two silver linings from my point of view. The first is that I think there's a much deeper appreciation for the need to treat mental health on par with physical health. Mental health in our state has been neglected for many decades. I'm very proud that over the last 4 years, I have been the leader of trying to increase funding successfully for mental health professionals throughout the state, starting with those who are at the front lines and being paid very low, and then working up through the middle ranks of the professions. All this while, I should add, there are people working in PR jobs for our largest hospitals making more than $500,000 a year. The second thing is we have a system where the elite healthcare establishment continues to tell us to keep waiting for reforms to materialize. And each year we say they haven't materialized. They say, oh, it's too soon, it's too soon. Well, yes, system transformations do take time, but now is the moment to start shifting resources to primary care, mental health care, and making sure that the needs of older Vermonters are being taken care of. I'm actually particularly concerned about older Vermonters who have been effectively isolated now for 4 months. They need friendship and companionship, they need nutrition, and they need the ability to safely access medical care.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your thoughtful answers on that question. Next, Debbie Ingram.
Before COVID struck, the 3 issues that I outlined as my campaign priorities were making our housing more affordable, making our healthcare closer to a universal healthcare system, and creating a situation of economic dignity for all Vermonters. And since the COVID crisis hit, I think that those 3 priorities are even more important. And the crisis has shown the gaps in all of those systems. But I totally agree with the premise of the question that it also affords us opportunities to make bold change. And we have seen that literally overnight, in some instances, when we have decided that something is an urgent priority, we can make a bold, visionary change. And I think we should seize this opportunity to really invest in our housing and to continue to house all of our homeless population. We were able to do that very, very quickly. We need to continue that. We need to seize on the opportunity to create a system at least of universal primary care so that people are not paying copays and deductibles and other out-of-pocket costs for their primary care. And we need to seize on the opportunity to raise people's wages so that if they'd had more savings to begin with when the crisis started, they wouldn't be in such desperate shape. So I would want to do that as Lieutenant Governor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And finally, Molly Gray.
It shouldn't take a global pandemic for us to realize that we've left Vermonters behind and extremely vulnerable when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to access to the internet. And I'll keep talking about that because I find it outrageous in 2020 that 1/4 of Vermont still cannot get online. And we've failed to appropriate the necessary funding to make that possible before our schools reopen. What we knew before COVID-19 is that 50% of Vermonters could not afford an emergency expense of $1,000 or more. These are not new issues. So it's healthcare, it's making sure we have access to telemedicine, it's investing in primary care across our state, moving to a universal care model. It's investing in workforce development. So as a state that has the highest graduation rate of seniors across the country, at only something like 41% don't go on to any further education. We take the time now to invest in higher ed, in CCV, and our state colleges. We have real pathways when it comes to workforce development. And again, making broadband a reality. We need this not only because of COVID-19, but because our future, our demographic challenges, our ability for our rural communities to thrive, all depends on it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Our next question has been given to us from the Racial Justice Alliance. They would like to know, what are 3 specific things you would do to eradicate systemic racism if you were elected? We'll start with Tim Ash.
All right. Well, this is a area that I've been working on for many years, and I'll begin by saying that having attended the first protest in the wake of George Floyd's murder at Battery Park in Burlington, I was walking home and reflecting on all the legislation I'd had a hand in to try to root out systemic injustices in all of our systems as a state. And I was reflecting about the feeling of dissatisfaction that many leaders in communities of color have brought to the State House after we passed those bills. And I realized the very people who are supposed to implement these bills always find a way to water it down, slow it down, or flat out ignore it. And so I told the Senate that enough is enough, and we are going to act, and we have begun to act. In my opinion, one of the most important things we can do is do a rigorous review of racial disparities in every step of the law enforcement criminal justice continuum to root out disparities wherever we find it. We have found non-compliance with agencies throughout the state. We have geographic access to justice issues, which have been flat out ignored by our top law enforcement officials in the state, and we must do better. We also need citizen accountability over our Criminal Justice Training Council, which will have a broad effect in improving the removal of as much bias as possible out of our system. And I will make sure that the ethnic studies curriculum legislation, and I want to give kudos to Debbie for her role in initiating that bill. The way we educate our kids creates a foundation for the rest of their lives. We need to make sure that gets implemented throughout the state.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next, Debbie Ingram.
So 3 things that I would do would be, first of all, to improve and expand our race data collection around law enforcement, around our COVID cases, around many aspects of what's going on in government. Because in my conversations with people of color and with advocates around social justice, I've come to understand that when we have hard data that is irrefutable that we can present to people, it's much easier to get things done and to convince them that there are problems. So I think that we need to be very robust in our data collection. Secondly, I don't like to make policies by just 2-word slogans, but I think that defund the police is something that really resonates with me in terms of the radical transformation of how we approach public safety. I think that we need to shift funds from the traditional means of guns and militarism in the police to embedding mental health workers and social workers and substance use disorder counselors and people who can help bring a more restorative approach to calls and to really transforming in a very major way our public safety. And then lastly, actually, as Tim mentioned, I would take action on the recommendations that the Ethnic Studies Task Force brings back to us, because I think starting with the next generation, with our young people, and making sure that they are being taught in a way that's different from the way things have been handed down to white people for so long is really crucial to moving ahead in the future.
Thank you. Molly Gray.
I think it's important to first acknowledge that if we have the same people at the table, we're going to continue to have the same outcomes when it comes to racial injustice across Vermont. I'll be the first to admit that while I have a lot of experience when it comes to advocating for human rights, I don't have the lived experience as a white woman in Vermont to understand how that's impacted employment or education or access to opportunity, economic disparity in our criminal justice system. So for me, it's putting those who are most impacted every single day at the forefront in our decision-making when it comes to addressing discrimination in employment, when it comes to addressing police brutality or criminal justice reform across the state. Second, we have to align our laws with what is right. As a lawyer, we always ask, what is legal? And then our next question has to be, what is right? And it's our job as policymakers and leaders to move the law in the direction of what is right when it comes to racial harassment, when it comes to criminal justice reform. And then the third point would be, we need to take action right now to address areas right here at home where we can do more on use of force. We can expand the aperture and adopt the California standard, for example. We can use more data and use that data to drive changes to policy and to hold police accountable across the state. There's so much we can do, but I think it truly begins with putting new voices at the table in every single conversation and having the commitment to doing that from here forward.
Wonderful, thank you. And finally, Brenda Siegel.
We do need to defund the police and the prison industrial complex. And we need to do that and put those resources not only into social services and into mental health, but also directly into the communities that have been most impacted and harmed by our racist systems and policies. We, of course, need to pass the bills that were hanging on the wall for so long and really meaningfully ban use of force in this state. In addition, we have to, as white people, we need to reflect on our own privilege and talk just in our immediate circles. And that means, if as Lieutenant Governor, going into the communities, both that are impacted and to our own communities, and making sure that we are having these discussions around how we allow our privilege to continue. And so that's a really important part of what the Lieutenant Governor has the opportunity to do, advocating on that issue. And in addition to that, we really have to work on our criminal justice system. So we do need to turn it into a transformative justice system and move it away from the system of punishment. And I would finally say that I also was strongly advocating for the ethnic studies standard, and we do need to implement that using the recommendations.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Our next question, the cost of healthcare continues to rise. One potential strategy is to institute a publicly funded universal primary care system to ensure primary care, including prevention and wellness to all. Do you support universal primary care? And if so, how would you support it? If not, what next steps would you support to take in order to move towards universal publicly funded healthcare? We'll begin with Debbie Ingram.
Thank you. Actually, if you recall, I brought this up already. I do definitely support a universal primary care system. I've been serving for the last 4 years on the Senate Health and Welfare Committee, and I helped to introduce legislation around a universal primary care system. I think that we need to revisit this idea, as I said, seizing on the boldness of the moment that COVID has presented us with. What we have to do is in countries and states where primary care that more is invested in primary care, it actually brings down the cost of care later on, the delivery of care later on. But we need to be able to offset premiums that private insurance companies are charging with a fairer, more equitable tax structure in lieu of those premiums. So making the shift is complicated. That's one of our mottos in health and welfare. It's not simple, but I think having had the experience of trying to move that along, I would be already farther along in that struggle to continue to go down that road. And I definitely support that.
Wonderful, thank you. Molly Gray.
Yes, I absolutely support a universal primary care system. And just to share, as someone who grew up in Newberry and Orange County, I hear again and again and again from our smaller communities across the state how challenging it is in this moment to access just basic healthcare. There's a woman in Wells River who tells me this story about getting on 2 different forms of public transportation to get down to Dartmouth Hitchcock just to do a 15-minute appointment. So I think when we talk about healthcare, we not only need to talk about access and what that looks like, but telemedicine and how do we invest in the infrastructure to make healthcare accessible. But furthermore, how do we incentivize moving away from a fee-for-service model, but to a quality of care model that looks at our communities, it looks at our population and says, we care about Vermonters. We know this is a basic human right. It's the responsibility of the state to ensure that Vermonters are cared for. And then we put the systems in place right now as we move forward to ensure that everyone has access to quality, affordable healthcare, including in our rural communities.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Brenda Siegel.
Thank you. I do support universal primary care. I also would support fully funding Act 48 or moving towards another type of Medicare for All program, either within our state or within a coalition of our states. And I think part of the way that we implement that is that we work with people across the state who all have a vested interest in bringing healthcare to the forefront. It is a popular issue in this state, and so we do have this opportunity. And one thing that we can do is we can talk about the funding for it in a different way than we have over the many years. We often let the right have control of that messaging, and we have the opportunity to control that messaging and to work with people on the ground so that they are bringing out those messages forward. Because I know at times when I was sick in my life, if I hadn't had a safety net of healthcare, then I would not have been able to get the treatment that I needed. And there are my peers who do not get the treatment that they needed. So the way to move forward, especially from the lieutenant governor's seat, is to really both act as a conduit between the people on the ground and the legislature and the governor, and to really bring forth those stories and be able to step back from the podium and allow those stories to come forward. Because it's not just about bringing those messages to Montpelier, it's about letting those folks tell their own stories in Montpelier.
Thank you. Tim Ash.
Thank you. Of course, I support universal primary care, though I will say it with the caveat of it depends how we construct the payments for it. Those of you who know me well know that I have a sort of physical inability to pander. And it's very easy during campaign season to say that we're going to have universal childcare, we're going to have universal primary care, we're going to have universal everything. But there's only so much money to pay for all the additional things we would like to see. So from my point of view, the best way to finance universal primary care is about shifting resources away from expensive hospitalization services and moving those funds upstream for primary care, which I should add must include mental health and dental. I'm very proud that working with Anthony and Debbie and others, we made the largest increase in adult Medicaid benefits in almost 30 years. Some people are unwilling to take on the healthcare establishment. The largest hospitals that pay their executives massive sums of money, not just the CEOs, but PR Flax and others, they seem to not have enough money to pay nurses a little bit more, or LPNs a little bit more, or janitors a little bit more, but they can pay themselves a heck of a lot of money. That's money that could be moved and redirected upstream to primary care. And I'll continue to make every effort to do that. Because the problem is not that we don't spend enough on healthcare, it's how we spend the money.
Thank you. The legislature has passed an unfunded Global Warming Solutions Act intended to reduce carbon emissions that is not grounded fully in the current science or in social justice. Do you support funding a just transition to a sustainable economy in line with a Green New Deal type plan? And if so, how would you ensure economic, racial justice in this transition, and how would it be funded? Molly.
Sorry, I'm smiling because I'm like, is this still a question? Of course I would fund the Global Warming Solutions Act. Of course I have supported, I've been talking about it. I want to reflect on just being in Bennington this last weekend, and that there are still 300 families in Bennington County that have been impacted by PFOA and the ChemFab lab there. we have left a lot of Vermonters behind when it comes to environmental justice in the state. And I know that's not related to the Global Warming Solutions Act, but I wanted to bring it up because I think it speaks to the leadership that we need in this moment when we think about protecting Vermonters, supporting our first and worst communities, and making sure that those who have the expertise when it comes to protecting our environment, working our lands, our farmers, and many more folks when we think about climate action. So for me, it's again, what voices do we have at the table? We should be asking ourselves that every day. Do we have the courage and the strength and the commitment to the issues, to protecting Vermonters and to protecting the land and environment that's taking care of us to move forward? And then to say, COVID-19 or not, we are going to put climate justice and climate action at the forefront, because let's just face it, COVID-19 is a warm up for what we will experience and continue to experience as we move forward with a warming climate.
Thank you. Brenda Siegel.
Yes, I definitely support the Global Warming Solutions Act, and I also support a Green Mountain New Deal, although I understand we're now calling it Renew New England because it has some negative impact on Indigenous communities. And so Renew New England, what it does is it makes a New England coalition of states with a position on bringing forth climate justice and bringing it together with racial and economic justice. And that's what we need to do right now. It is part of our economic solution right now coming out of COVID. It really is. And we also need to do it because it is what is just. It is a just transition inside of our state. We can't wait anymore on this climate crisis. We have seen that when science dictates we must act, we are capable of changing our behavior. So right now we have that opportunity to do that same thing. And I want to add here that the people on the ground, the Black and brown folks, the Indigenous folks, the advocates, the single moms who are doing the work, they aren't just talking the talk. They're fighting hard and they are working and really hard on these issues. And it's really important to recognize that legislators alone are not doing that work. And I want to make sure that those voices are recognized and heard across our state.
Thank you very much. Tim Ash.
Thanks. Well, as many of you know, just about 3 weeks ago, the Senate passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, and I was able to marshal a veto-proof majority in the Senate in bringing along some Republicans as well. So very proud of that. In terms of fighting climate change, I might be the only person who has a practitioner's perspective that's running for lieutenant governor, having developed several solar projects and helped manage probably the largest residential weatherization project in Vermont history in downtown Burlington. From my point of view, there are several key strategies moving forward. The first is, I believe very strongly, and I believe I've been the most vocal person in Vermont, that Vermont must participate in the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is a multi-state compact, which will guarantee a reduction in transportation emissions, which is Vermont's worst contributor for climate change, and it will bring in revenues to invest in smart transportation. I believe strongly that now is the time for a weatherization bond for both residential and commercial buildings. Interest rates are very, very low. It's a labor-intensive activity, which is good for the economy. I think Vermont's next big bet in renewable energy should be in storage, and allow all the people who are innovative in solar to move over to the storage sector, which is a real place ready for pioneering. And I also think the state should divest its pension system. I've been pushing the treasurer. She's been resistant. I believe now is the time, and I'm very proud that my alma mater today announced that they would be divesting their pension funds after resisting it for many years.
Thank you. Finally, Debbie Ingram.
Well, I agree that our ultimate goal is to have a Green New Deal that preserves equity among low-income people, people of color, people who have been disproportionately affected by climate change and who have had to bear the burdens of the non-renewable energy and the transportation costs that we have had for such a long time. The Global Warming Solutions Act was, I think everybody who voted for it realized that it sets the foundation for future action The question criticizes certain elements of it, and I would agree with that. As we were working with the leadership of the House was really amazing to get that through before COVID. And then, I do appreciate Senator Ash's leadership and several other people in getting it through in the Senate as well. So it's one of the things that's really great about it, I think, is that it truly holds us accountable for the goals that we set, which hasn't really taken place before. And if the government can be taken to court for not meeting these goals, then that will continue to change the culture and change the way that the government operates to really create a situation in which we can work towards a Green New Deal and really have the level of change that we need.
Thank you so much. I'd like to give each candidate an additional 30 seconds to expand on their view on a just transition and or how they might fund their climate plan. We'll start with Molly.
I think a just transition really comes down to how do we diversify all of the different opportunities for individuals in our communities to participate in protecting our state, protecting our health, protecting each other. So it's workforce development, thinking about how do we create incentives in jobs and weatherization and solar, technicians for electric vehicles, for example, it's investing in local resilient food systems. It's thinking about the cost of electric vehicles and making those accessible to Vermonters in our community and putting our first and worst communities at the forefront.
Thank you. Brenda Siegel. Oh, Brenda's muted.
Thank you. So I think that we absolutely need to move toward in a just transition. What we need to do is make sure that we are training and providing opportunities for people to move from careers perhaps that are in fossil fuels into green economy jobs. We need to make sure that when we are transitioning into a new economy, a better economy and a stronger economy, that we are working really hard to make it an equitable space, because if we don't do that intentionally, we will not get there.
Excellent, thank you. Tim Ash.
Well, the three strategies all four strategies, TCI, a weatherization bond, storage, and divestment, effectively pay for themselves and return dividends to the state rather than costing new money. But I'll say one of my top priorities is approaching climate change the way I always have, and which has always made me a bit of an outlier in the climate change fighting community, which is I believe that our strategies must be ones that aren't just available to people who have tremendous financial resources. I'm all for people buying Teslas, but if we're going to fight climate change, we need to enlist a broad group of Vermonters who don't think of themselves first as environmentalists because they're busy putting food on the table. So every strategy, in my opinion, must be designed to save normal people money so that we can enlist everybody. Otherwise, we can't meet our goals.
Thank you. And finally, Debbie Ingram.
I mean, I agree with the pillars of renewable energy and TCI and weatherization. At some point we're going to have to look seriously. We've talked around a carbon emissions tax quite a bit, and we want to make sure that we're holding lower income people harmless in that and offering them at the same pace that we're creating disincentives for use of fossil fuels. We're providing alternatives, and it's difficult, but that would be the approach that I would pursue.
Wonderful. Thank you all for your thoughtful answers to the long answer question round. We are now going to move into our faster round of questioning. These questions are meant to be short, yes or no, or very short few word answers without an explanation. So please try and limit your answers to 1 to 3 words. The first question that will go first to Brenda is, do you support the F-35s being based in Burlington?
She's muted.
Brenda is muted.
I do not. I do not.
Wonderful. Thank you. Tim,
It's not the state's decision.
Debbie,
No, and come to my house sometime to hear how loud they are.
Molly.
I agree with Tim. It's beyond our control.
The next question is, what's the most recent book you read? Tim,
Locking Up Our Own by James Ford.
thank you. Debbie,
I'm reading, oh, I have to look and see, but it's, I'm reading a novel right now called The Authenticity Project by Carla Pooley.
wonderful. Molly,
I'm working through donut economics.
Brenda,
Gosh, I'm forgetting the name of my most recent book, but The Red Tent.
wonderful. Thank you. Do you support mandatory statewide mask wearing? Debbie,
No,
Molly,
We're all on the same team.
Brenda,
Yeah. Do I support mandated mask wearing? Yes.
Tim.
In places of public accommodation, yes.
All right. Statewide, do you support statewide ranked choice voting? Molly,
Yes.
Brenda,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Debbie.
yes,
Wonderful. Do you support publicly funded pre-K through post-secondary education? Brenda,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Debbie,
in theory, finding the money's the hard part.
Molly.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're now on to our closing statements. You will each be given 1 minute to wrap up your thoughts and tell us how your view for the Lieutenant Governor's office is in line with the Vermont Progressive Party platform. We will begin with Senator Tim Ash.
Well, thank you, everybody. This has been a fun forum. The reason I'm running for Lieutenant Governor is really the same reason that's motivated my public service my whole life, which has been a desire to close the gap between what I call the two Vermonts. I'll ask you to look at my website, timash.com, where I expand upon that in my opening campaign remarks. And I'd just like to quickly address an issue. I ran for Senate as a Democrat with the support of the Progressive Party, and I've served there now for 12 years. I feel like in many ways I've helped bridge the gap between two parties to allow people to focus on the issues and stop all the infighting. There are still candidate supporters who attack me because I have a P after the D when I run for office. I've been attacked because I've supported some of the people on this call and endorsed you in your races. So I'm never going to be a party purist for any party. I think everybody who knows me knows that. But I've been very proud to stand with progressives on issue after issue. I've advanced among the most progressive agendas in America the last 4 years working with the Speaker, and I would love your support for Lieutenant Governor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next, Senator Debbie Ingram.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I think if you base your decision on the candidate's records and values, that you will come to the conclusion that I am the person that you would like to support. On the Progressive Party platform's many issues, I have excellent record of racial justice, gender equality, human rights, public safety, healthcare, education, housing, and the economy, climate change. All of those, I have a record of having already accomplished many things. And I have a vision for moving ahead on all of them. And then lastly, I would just say, I know the Progressive Party has a commitment to making sure that underrepresented groups are better represented. And I would be the first LGBTQ plus woman statewide office holder in the state. And I would be honored to have the Progressive Party endorsement.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Molly Gray.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, everyone. This has been a lot of fun. We are in a moment. And if we continue to elevate or elect the same people, we'll continue to have the same outcomes. And I wouldn't be running for office if we had childcare that was accessible and affordable, paid family and medical leave that allowed for a generation to take care of parents and also take care of children. We've been stalled on food security, on basic equity in Vermont, on providing equal access to broadband. And again, we're in a moment where there's a fourth of our state that can't get online. It's simply outrageous. So I'm running for lieutenant governor because it's time to put people, community, and family at the forefront. I have been fighting for human rights for my entire career. I am committed to serving Vermont. I am deeply rooted in the state, and I couldn't be more proud to be running for lieutenant governor. I'd love to be a strong partner for the Progressive Party and to bring our shared values across Vermont and continue to be a leader for our state and for our communities, and to work with you all.
Thank you. Finally, Brenda Siegel.
We need to build a path forward for marginalized and forgotten voices to have a seat at the table with equal voice and equal power. I'm a single mom and I've faced a lot of adversity, and I've turned that adversity into action. We have the power to make change. We right now have a lieutenant governor who has opened up the office and brought progressive change and progressive values to that office. And we cannot take the chance of going backwards on that at all. We absolutely must fight for bold climate action, healing the overdose crisis, and strengthening and supporting our education system. But we have to do that in an overarching framework that brings together climate justice and economic justice with racial justice. We have a ton of power when it's the people on the ground that rise up. And I'm asking for your support today because I know that we can build that power together.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our 4 candidates for the thoughtful discussion and answers today. I'm now going to ask that the candidates and their teams leave this meeting and the state committee stay for a discussion as to whether or not we wish to move forward with an endorsement vote. To be clear, no endorsement will be decided upon tonight, only if the committee wishes to hold an endorsement vote. If we do choose to move forward with an endorsement vote, it will be held via an electronic voting system and will use a ranked choice vote. By law, we must have a quorum of 50% of the state committee members take part in that vote. And of those who vote, a candidate must get a 2/3 majority in order to receive the endorsement. If no endorsement is made through this process, we can reassess after the primary. With that, I would like to again thank all of our candidates for being here and for offering us their thoughts on how they would lead us from the Lieutenant Governor's office. And I would welcome our state committee members to stay for a discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How do I leave?
Hey.
Okay, we ready?
I think
Yeah, I just want to remind folks, even though the candidates are gone, we are still live streaming. So
can we stop that?
I can, if that's what folks would like to do. Maybe Anthony, would you like?
I think so.
Okay, so I'll stop the live stream right now, and and I'll also ask CCP to stop the live stream, and we can have a somewhat candid conversation. So thank you to everyone who's tuned in.